The first time Nelody saw his profile, she almost scrolled past it. It was late. Pretoria was quiet in that particular way it gets on weeknights, streetlights glowing softly, the distant hum of cars fading into nothing. Nelody lay on her back, phone balanced against her knees, the blue light washing over her face. She wasn't new to dating apps. She just wasn't good at them. At 34, she had already lived through a long-term relationship that taught her what betrayal felt like. She had done the crying, the journaling, the praying. She had promised herself she would never again ignore red flags just because she wanted a fairy tale, so when she saw his profile, David M. 38, entrepreneur, widower, father of one, she paused for reasons she couldn't quite explain. His photos were understated. No shirtless gym pictures. No sunglasses in every frame. Just a clean smile, thoughtful eyes, a picture of him at what looked like a charity event, sleeves rolled up, laughing at something off camera. His bio was simple: father, builder, believer in second chances. Looking for something real, she told herself she'd learn not to be impressed by words. Still, she matched with him. They started chatting that same night. David wrote in full sentences. That alone set him apart. He asked about her work. She was a high school literature teacher, and actually seemed interested when she explained how she used poetry to help her students process their emotions. You sound like someone who sees people, he wrote. It was a strange thing to say so early, but it didn't feel rehearsed. It felt observant. Over the next week, their messages turned into voice notes. His voice was deep, calm, steady. He laughed easily. He told her about his late wife, cancer, 3 years ago. He spoke about grief in a way that felt raw but controlled, like a man who had survived something and chosen not to be bitter. Nelody's chest would tighten listening to him. He never rushed her. Never pushed for late-night photos or inappropriate jokes. He asked about her faith, about her childhood, about what she feared most. I fear wasting my life, she admitted one night. Then let's not waste it, he said. It sounded romantic. It sounded safe. Their first date was at a quiet restaurant in Brooklyn. He stood when she walked in. He was taller than she expected. Broader. He smelled like something clean and warm. When he hugged her, it wasn't invasive, it was protective. Dinner was easy. Effortless. He remembered small details from their chats. The author she loved. The fact that she hated coriander. He asked thoughtful questions. He listened. He paid without making a show of it. As they walked to her car, he didn't try to kiss her. I don't want to rush something that feels promising, he said. She drove home smiling. The red flags, when they appeared, were so subtle they didn't even feel red, they felt beige, small inconsistencies. The first one was about his son. One evening, while they were on the phone, Nelody asked how his 8-year-old was doing. 8. David paused. Oh, sorry. I meant he just turned 9. I keep forgetting. It was such a small thing. People must speak all the time. Another time, he mentioned closing a business deal in Cape Town. Later that week, he referred to it happening in Durban. When she pointed it out, he laughed. Babe, I travel so much I mix things up. You know how it is. She didn't know how it was. But she wanted to. He always had an explanation. Always delivered smoothly, with just enough self-deprecating humor to make her feel silly for questioning him. And that was the thing about David. He never got defensive. He never snapped. He didn't shut down or attack. He simply adjusted reality. 3 months in, he told her he loved her. They were sitting in his car outside her apartment. Rain tapped softly against the windshield. I wasn't planning to fall in love again, he said quietly. I didn't think I could. But you make me feel alive. Nelody felt her breath catch. It had been years since someone said those words and meant them. Or at least, seemed to. I love you too, she whispered, and she believed it. David's world was impressive, but curiously distant. He said he owned a logistics company. Said he had investments overseas. His lifestyle matched the story: nice car, expensive watches, generous gestures, but she never went to his office. It's chaotic, he'd say. And I want our time to be ours. She met his son only once, briefly, at a park. A sweet, quiet boy who clung to his father. She never met his parents. They lived abroad. His friends were always traveling or busy. When she mentioned introducing him to her own family, he agreed immediately. He was charming. Warm. Attentive. Her mother pulled her aside later that night. He's polished, her mother said carefully. That's a bad thing. It's just, be careful of people who seem too put together. Nelody brushed it off. She thought her mother was projecting. He proposed 6 months after they met, not in public. Not with a flash mob, just the two of them, at home, after cooking dinner together. I don't want to wait, he said, holding her hands. Life is fragile. I already lost one love. I won't lose another because I hesitated. The ring was beautiful. Not overly large, but elegant. She cried. She said yes. The wedding was small and intimate. His side was thin, just a couple of business associates. He said most of his family couldn't travel on short notice. She felt a flicker of unease watching her crowded side of the venue compared to his sparse one, but she told herself grief does that. It isolates people. She chose faith, she chose him. The unraveling didn't happen all at once. It began with a letter. 3 months into their marriage, Nelody was organizing paperwork when she found an envelope addressed to David under a stack of unopened mail. It wasn't from a bank, it was from a debt collection agency. She felt her stomach tighten. When she confronted him, he didn't panic. He sighed. I didn't want to burden you, he said. After my wife got sick, the medical bills piled up. I've been handling it. It made sense. It fit the tragic widower narrative. She apologized for doubting him. He held her and whispered, "Thank you for trusting me." But then more letters came, different agencies, different amounts. When she suggested sitting down to review finances together, his demeanor shifted, just slightly. Do you not trust me? He asked quietly. It wasn't angry, it was wounded, and Nelody, who had spent years healing from being made to feel unseen, couldn't bear the thought of becoming someone who made another person feel that way. I trust you, she said, and she let it go. The first crack in the foundation came from an unexpected place, social media. One afternoon, a woman sent her a message. Hi. I think you're married to David M. Nelody's heart pounded. Yes. I don't know how to say this. But I dated him last year. And the year before that. Nelody stared at the screen. That's impossible, she typed. He was married. His wife passed away 3 years ago. There was a pause. What wife? The woman sent screenshots. Photos. Messages. In some, he claimed to be single. In others, divorced. Different stories. Different tragedies. The dates overlapped. Nelody's hands shook. She felt like the floor had tilted when David came home that evening. She didn't scream, she didn't cry. She placed her phone on the table and said, "Explain." He looked at the screen, then he looked at her, and he smiled, not a guilty smile, not nervous, just calm. She's obsessed, he said. I ended things. She couldn't handle it. She says there was no wife. She doesn't know everything about my life. But why would she lie? He leaned forward. Why are you so quick to believe a stranger over your husband? The word husband felt heavy. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look cornered. He looked practiced. That night, Nelody didn't sleep. She replayed every conversation. Every detail, the age mix-up, the business locations, the distant family, the vague friends. She began searching company records, public documents. She couldn't find his business. The company name he'd mentioned didn't exist. Her chest tightened. The next morning, she called the hospital where his wife had supposedly been treated. There was no record of her, no death certificate she could find, no obituary. When she confronted him again, his composure cracked for the first time. "You went behind my back?" he asked, voice low. "You lied," she replied. "I protected you." "From what?" "From the truth." Her heart sank. "What truth?" He stared at her for a long moment, then he said something that would echo in her mind for years. "I don't know why I do it." It wasn't a confession of one lie, it was an admission of something deeper. "I start telling a story and it just grows," he said. "It feels real. And then I can't undo it." Nelody felt cold. So there was no wife. No, no cancer. No, no company. "I've had jobs," he said vaguely. "No son." He hesitated. "There's a boy," he said. "But he's my nephew." "I told you he was mine because..." It sounded better. Her throat closed. "You built our entire relationship on fiction." He reached for her hand. "But my feelings for you are real." She pulled away. "How would I know?" Over the next few days, the full scope unraveled. He had lied about finances. He was drowning in debt. He had lied about properties he claimed to own. He had lied about past relationships. Some lies were grand, some were pointless, like saying he had visited Paris when he hadn't, or claiming he spoke fluent French, or that he once met a famous politician at a conference. None of it added up, and yet, while she confronted him with evidence, he still tried to smooth the edges. "You're focusing on the wrong things," he said. "We're happy." Were they? Nelody began to question her own memory. Had she been happy? Or had she been swept up in a carefully curated illusion? The hardest part wasn't the lies. It was the erosion of reality. Every shared memory now felt unstable. When he said he loved her, was that a lie too, or was love the only truth in a sea of fabrication? She suggested therapy. He agreed immediately. In the therapist's office, he was articulate. Self-aware, he admitted to embellishing. To coping through storytelling. The therapist used a word Nelody had only ever heard in passing: pathological lying. A compulsion. A pattern. Not always for clear gain, but for identity, control, admiration. It explained everything, and yet it didn't fix anything. Living with a pathological liar is like living in a house where the walls shift at night. You wake up and the door you thought led to safety now opens into emptiness. Nelody started double-checking everything: receipts, timelines, stories. She hated the version of herself she was becoming: suspicious, anxious, hypervigilant. He would swear he told the truth about something small. She would later discover he hadn't. When she confronted him, he sometimes looked genuinely confused, as if he believed his own version. Other times, he'd shrug. "It's not that deep." But it was, because trust is never about the size of the lie, it's about the stability of reality. The breaking point came quietly. One evening, as she folded laundry, her phone buzzed again. Another woman, another story. This one claimed she had been engaged to him 2 years before Nelody met him. He had told her the same story about a wife who died, the same timeline, the same phrases: "Life is fragile. I won't hesitate again." Nelody felt something inside her finally snap, not in rage, but in clarity. She realized she had never been in a relationship, she had been in a performance, and he had been both actor and audience. That night, she didn't argue, she didn't demand explanations, she simply said, "I can't live like this." He cried. It was the first time she saw him break down fully. "I'll change," he said. "I'll stop. I'll get help." Maybe he meant it, maybe he didn't, but Nelody understood something then that she wished she had understood earlier. You cannot love someone into honesty, you cannot compete with a fantasy they prefer over reality, and you cannot build a future on ground that keeps shifting. The divorce was messy but not dramatic. He alternated between remorse and revisionist history. Sometimes he claimed she was overreacting. Other times he admitted he needed help. She stopped trying to figure out which version was real. She focused on herself, on rebuilding her sense of truth, on trusting her own instincts again, on forgiving herself for ignoring the beige flags. Months later, she would sit with her journal and write, "He didn't just lie about who he was. He lied about who I was to him, and that was the deepest cut." But she also wrote, "I am not foolish for believing in love. I am brave for leaving when love became confusion." Years later, when people asked what happened in her marriage, she didn't say much. She didn't speak with bitterness. She didn't dramatize it. She simply said, "He wasn't who he said he was." And that was enough, because the real story wasn't about a man who lied. It was about a woman who learned that clarity is kinder than fantasy, and that sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is choose reality, no matter how painful, over a beautiful lie. And that was enough. But the truth was, that sentence carried more weight than most people understood, because after the divorce papers were signed and the last box of his things was gone, the silence in her apartment felt louder than any argument they had ever had. At first, she thought the hardest part would be missing him. It wasn't. The hardest part was missing the version of him that never existed. She missed the man who stood up when she walked into the restaurant. The man who said, "I don't want to rush something that feels promising." The man who spoke about second chances like they were sacred. She had to accept that those moments were real in experience, but not real in foundation. That kind of confusion lingers. For months, she questioned her own judgment. She replayed early conversations in her head while driving to work. She would be marking essays and suddenly remember a small detail that didn't make sense, like the time he said his son was allergic to peanuts, but at the park he handed the boy a peanut butter sandwich. At the time, she had laughed it off. Now, she understood something chilling. The lies were constant. Not dramatic. Not always useful. Just constant. It wasn't about money. It wasn't even always about attention. It was about control. If he controlled the story, he controlled how people saw him. And if he controlled how people saw him, he never had to sit with who he actually was. That realization helped her stop taking it personally. Almost one afternoon, about 8 months after the divorce, Nelody got an email. It was from him. Subject line, "I'm in therapy." She stared at it for a long time before opening it. He wrote that he had been diagnosed with compulsive lying. That it stemmed from childhood. That he grew up in a home where mistakes were punished harshly, so he learned to lie to survive. That over time, lying became easier than telling the truth. "I never meant to hurt you," he wrote. "I loved you the only way I knew how." She read that line 3 times. It didn't bring closure, but it brought context, and sometimes context is the only thing you get. She didn't respond, not out of anger, but because she finally understood that she didn't need his explanations to move forward. Healing didn't look dramatic. It looked like small routines: waking up early and sitting on her balcony with tea, going to church even when she didn't feel like talking to anyone, saying no without over-explaining, trusting her instincts when something felt off. Even in small things, her friends noticed the difference first. "You seem calmer," one of them said over brunch. She smiled. "I'm not trying to decode anyone anymore." That was the gift in all of it: peace, not excitement, not butterflies, peace. About a year later, she ran into one of the women who had messaged her during the marriage. They met for coffee. The woman looked embarrassed at first, like she expected hostility, but there wasn't any. They compared stories quietly, same phrases, same promises, same timeline overlaps. It was strange how similar their experiences were. Almost like they had dated the same script instead of the same man. "You know what scares me?" the woman said softly. "Sometimes I still miss him." Nelody nodded. "I don't miss him," she replied carefully. "I miss how he made me feel." And that was honest. He had been attentive, present, Intense, but intensity is not the same as stability. And attention is not the same as truth. 2 years passed, Nelody dated again, slowly. The first time a new man told her a story that didn't quite add up, her body reacted before her mind did. Her chest tightened. Her hands felt cold. Instead of brushing it off, she asked questions, clear ones, direct ones, and when his answers shifted, she walked away. No drama, no convincing herself she was overthinking. She had learned something important. Confusion is not chemistry. Real connection feels steady. It does not require constant interpretation. Sometimes, late at night, she would think about David. She wondered if he ever learned to sit in silence without inventing something. She wondered who he was when no one was watching, but she no longer felt responsible for his healing. That was another lesson. You can have compassion for someone and still decide they are not safe for you. Both can be true at the same time. The strangest part of loving a pathological liar is this: you doubt your own memories long after they're gone. But over time, Nelody began trusting herself again, not because she became cynical, but because she became honest about red flags, honest about her desire to be chosen, honest about how badly she wanted the fairy tale. There is nothing wrong with wanting love. The danger is wanting it so badly that you ignore reality. She doesn't ignore reality anymore. She pays attention to consistency. She listens to tone changes. She watches patterns, not promises, and she no longer apologizes for asking questions. One Sunday afternoon, while cleaning out an old drawer, she found the engagement ring. She had meant to sell it months ago. Instead, she sat on the edge of her bed and looked at it. It was still beautiful, still sparkled under the light, and for a moment, she felt sad, not for him, but for the version of herself who thought that ring meant security. She slipped it back into the box. Not with anger, not with shame, just acceptance. Some chapters don't end because you stopped loving someone, they end because you started loving yourself more, and that changed everything. She closed the ring box and placed it back in the drawer. For a second, she just sat there. The room was quiet. The kind of quiet that used to scare her after the divorce. Back then, silence felt like proof that she had failed at something. Now it just felt like space to think, space to breathe, space to tell herself the truth without anyone interrupting it. She stood up, walked to the kitchen, and made tea. It had become her small ritual whenever memories tried to pull her under. Boil water. Wait. Pour. Watch the steam rise. It grounded her. While the kettle clicked off, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost ignored it. Almost, but something in her chest tightened in a familiar way. She answered, "Hello." There was a pause. A breath. Nelody. She knew the voice immediately. It had been over 2 years, but some voices don't change. "Yes. It's me." Of course it was. She didn't ask how he got her number. That wasn't the point. "How are you?" he asked. It was such a normal question. As if they had parted gently. As if there hadn't been months of unraveling and doubt and sleepless nights. "I'm fine," she said calmly. He hesitated. "I've been wanting to call for a while." She leaned against the counter and stared at the wall. "Why?" I've been doing a lot of work on myself. Therapy. Accountability. I needed you to know that." She didn't respond right away. He continued, "I lied about a lot of things. But I never lied about loving you." There it was again, that sentence. She closed her eyes briefly. "David," she said quietly, "loving someone includes telling them the truth." Silence. On the other end, she could hear him breathing. "I know that now," he replied, and maybe he did, "but growth does not erase damage." "Why are you calling?" she asked again. This time his voice sounded less steady. "I heard you're seeing someone." That caught her off guard. "I'm not asking who," he added quickly. I wanted to say I'm happy for you." She almost laughed. "You don't sound happy." Another pause. "I just didn't think you'd move on so completely." There it was, not regret, not accountability, possession, the same quiet need to remain central in her story. I didn't move on completely, she said honestly. I healed. That's different. He didn't answer. She realized something in that moment. The old her would have tried to soften the conversation. She would have reassured him, made him comfortable. She didn't feel the need to do that anymore. I hope therapy helps you, she said. I really do. And she meant it, but she also knew something else. Healing for him did not require access to her. I won't be able to stay in contact. She added gently. He inhaled sharply. So that's it. That's it. Another long silence, then, goodbye, Nelody. Goodbye. She ended the call. Her hands weren't shaking, her heart wasn't racing, there was no rush of panic, just stillness. She poured her tea and walked to the balcony. The sky was turning orange as the sun dipped low over Pretoria. Cars moved below, people living their lives, unaware of the quiet milestone that had just happened in her kitchen. She realized something simple but powerful. Closure doesn't always come from answers, sometimes it comes from your own response. A few months later, she started seeing someone seriously. His name was Kobelo. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't dramatic. He didn't make grand speeches about second chances. He was steady. The first time they went out, he told her he worked in IT. When she asked questions, his answers stayed the same weeks later. When he said he would call at 8, he called at 8. Consistency felt strange at first, almost boring, but then she understood. Boring is safe, boring is stable, boring is honest. One evening, while they were cooking together, she told him about her marriage, not all the details. Just enough. He lied about everything, she said simply. Kobelo didn't interrupt. He didn't rush to criticize her ex. He just listened. That must have made you question yourself, he said. She looked at him, surprised. It did. He nodded. Well, he said softly, you don't have to question yourself here. It was such a simple sentence, but it didn't feel like a performance. It felt solid. Trust didn't return overnight. There were moments she double-checked small things. Moments she asked follow-up questions, not because she doubted him, but because her nervous system remembered, and every time, Kobelo answered without irritation. One night she said, sometimes I'm scared I'll miss signs again. He shrugged gently. Then we'll talk about it. Out loud. No secrets. No secrets. It sounded ordinary, but to her, it sounded like oxygen. Every now and then, she would think about how easily she had once believed a beautiful story. She no longer blamed herself. David had been skilled, practiced, convincing, but she had also been hopeful. There is nothing foolish about hope. The problem is when hope is fed lies. Now, she feeds her hope with evidence, with patterns, with actions that match words. One afternoon, years after the divorce, she ran into David by accident at a shopping center. He looked thinner, older. He froze when he saw her. She felt it too, that flicker of shared history. They greeted each other politely. He didn't try to charm her, didn't try to rewrite anything. He just said, you look well. I am, she replied, and she was. There was no anger in her chest, no urge to prove anything, just distance. They exchanged a few neutral words and then went their separate ways. As she walked back to her car, she realized something quietly important. He no longer felt like a chapter that was still open, he felt like a lesson that had been learned, and she drove home without looking in the rearview mirror. She got into her car and sat there for a moment before starting the engine. Her hands rested lightly on the steering wheel. She expected to feel something dramatic after seeing him again. Anger. Sadness. Maybe even longing, but there was nothing heavy inside her, just calm. She drove home slowly. The late afternoon traffic moved gently, the radio playing low in the background. Ordinary life. Normal sounds. No chaos. When she got home, Kobelo was in the kitchen chopping onions. You're back, he said, looking up with a small smile. I ran into someone, she replied, placing her bag on the chair. Good someone or complicated someone? She paused. Old someone. He didn't press. He just nodded and waited. David, she added. Corbello's hand stopped for half a second, then continued chopping. How are you feeling? He asked. She thought about it carefully. Okay, she said. Better than I expected. He walked over, wiped his hands on a towel, and pulled her into a simple hug. Not tight. Not possessive. Just steady. I'm glad, he said, and that was it. No interrogation. No insecurity. No drama, just space for her to have a past without it threatening her present. That night, after dinner, she went to her room and opened her journal. She hadn't written about David in a long time. For a while, every page had been filled with him. Questions. Anger. Confusion. Prayers. Now the pages were about work. Family. Small joys. Plans. She clicked her pen and wrote, I saw him today. I didn't feel broken. She stared at the sentence, then she added, I didn't feel pulled back. That was new. 4 years, even the memory of him had felt like a hook in her chest. Today, it felt like looking at a photograph from another lifetime. She closed the journal and leaned back. Sometimes healing is loud. Sometimes it is quiet. For her, it had been quiet. It looked like choosing peace over performance, like asking direct questions without apologizing, like walking away the first time something felt off. It looked like not chasing explanations anymore. Months passed. One evening, Corbello invited her to dinner at his parents' house. It was simple. Warm. His mother insisted she take more food. His father asked her about teaching and listened closely to her answers. No one was performing. No one was trying to impress. Everything felt normal. On the drive home, Corbello reached for her hand. My mom likes you, he said. She smiled. I like her too. There was a small pause. I don't want to rush you, he added carefully. But I see a future with you. The words could have scared her once, but they didn't, because they weren't wrapped in urgency. They weren't dramatic. They weren't trying to seal something quickly. They were steady. She squeezed his hand. I see one too, she replied. A year later, they stood in a small garden surrounded by close friends and family. No grand speeches. No exaggerated promises, just simple vows. I promise to tell you the truth. Corbello said, looking directly into her eyes. Even when it's uncomfortable. Her throat tightened at that. I promise to listen, she replied. And to speak up when something doesn't feel right. It wasn't poetic, but it was real, and real felt sacred. On the night of their wedding, long after everyone had left and the house was quiet, Nelody stood alone for a moment in front of the mirror. She looked at herself carefully, not to check her makeup, but to check her eyes. Years ago, her eyes had held doubt she couldn't name. A constant scanning. A quiet fear of missing something. Now, they looked steady. She remembered the girl who had believed in a widower with a tragic story. The woman who had searched hospital records at midnight. The wife who had sat in therapy trying to untangle truth from fiction. She didn't feel ashamed of her, she felt protective of her. That woman had loved deeply. Trusted openly. And when the truth came out, she had chosen herself, not perfectly, not quickly, but firmly. Nelody turned off the light and walked back to her husband. When she lay down beside him, she felt something she had once confused for excitement but now understood differently. It wasn't butterflies, it wasn't intensity, it was safety, and for the first time in her adult life, she understood that safety was not boring, it was peace. She closed her eyes knowing that this time, she did not have to question the ground. Beneath her, the story she was living did not need constant editing, it did not shift when she wasn't looking, it was simple, it was honest, and it was hers.